What is up, folks? Today we are checking out the new SmallRig 220B. That's 220 for 220 watts of power, B for bicolor. Right now, the list price of this lamp is $369 US as of late June 2022. Now, the bicolor CCT range starts at 2700 Kelvin and runs all the way up to 6500 Kelvin. However, within that CCT range, there are no midpoints, meaning it goes from 2700 and jumps directly to 2800 Kelvin and so on. In other words, if you were hoping to dial in, say, 4550 Kelvin, you wouldn't be able to do so. You have 4500 Kelvin or 4600 Kelvin. There is no in between. So that is something to keep in mind. You won't exactly be able to dial in precise CCT with this unit. Now, at the time of filming this video, if you order this unit from B&H, you will receive a free V-mount adapter because this little 220B unit does run off of both 26 volt and 14 volt V-mount batteries. However, it is recommended that you use at least 150 watt hours or above. In other words, little nano V-mount batteries such as this one from Core SWX, it's a 98 watt hour. This may not allow you to run this light at its full capacity. In my opinion, I think it's a bummer that SmallRig requires you to purchase the V-mount adapter separately, because when you have a little light this small, to me, the whole reason for wanting it would be that it can run off a V-mount. Now, I understand that, if you order from B&H, they give it to you for free, but still, it should just be included in the package no matter where you buy it from. That's just my 2 cents. Now, there is a daylight version of the 220 as well. That's the 220D. However, kind of an upside of the bicolor unit is that it has a couple more special effects presets, because the 220B has 9 special effects. And those are paparazzi, fireworks, lightning, faulty bulb, television, breathing, flash, party light, and flame. And each of those special effects are customizable to the extent of the frequency and the brightness. Now, something nice about it is that it does have stepless dimming in 1% increments from 1% all the way up to 100. Now, of course, I took some readings with my Sekonic 800 with this light set to its native 5600 Kelvin, with the hyperreflector on, cranked up to 100% from a 3-meter distance. So now let's see how this 220B stacks up against some of its other competitors. Now keep in mind, these readings are with the hyperreflector on. The SmallRig is coming in at 417 foot candles or 4,490 lux. And now for a comparison with other competitor lights with their reflectors on from a 3-meter distance. A Nanlite FS300 is pushing out 365 foot candles. An Aperture 300D Mark II is 421 foot candles. An Aperture 300X is 65 foot candles. A 300D Mark I is 113 foot candles. An Aperture 120D Mark II is only 50 foot candles. And the newer Godox SL200 Mark II is 488 foot candles. So this little SmallRig 220 is packing more punch than the Nanlite FS300 and significantly more than an Aperture 300X. However, again, a lot of that is due to its hyperreflector, and I did already talk about the magic of these hyperreflectors in a previous video that I did on a smaller SmallRig unit, so I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. Now, obviously, the hyperreflector does attach to the light's standard bowens mount. So when you take the hyperreflector off, which you will inevitably do, especially if you plan on using this with any sort of modifier, and there's a really cool new one from SmallRig to go along with this light that we'll be looking at very, very shortly here, but the true output of the 220B without its hyperreflector on is 83 foot candles. So this little hyperreflector right here is increasing the output of the 220B by over 400%. So that is insane, and it would come in very, very useful if you just wanted to shove this thing through a 4x4 of heavy diffusion like a Magic Cloth or a full grid, or even if you wanted to create something like a book light. With this hyperreflector on, you're getting a hella lot of output. However, that drop from 417 foot candles to only 83 foot candles is something to bear in mind anytime you attach a modifier to this unit. And again, I'm excited about the one that SmallRig offers. However, before we get into that, let's talk about app control, because SmallRig does have a new app. It's called the GoGo app. Now, this unit also has a built-in cooling fan, and it does click on whenever the light hits 140 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter. And SmallRig claims that the fan noise is only 30 decibels from a 1 meter distance. However, in my experience of using this light and testing it out, the fan does kick on in intervals anywhere from 30 seconds up to 4 minutes, and the fan does run for about 2 minutes long, and this is how loud it really is. Keep in mind that happens every 30 seconds to 4 minutes, depending on the brightness of the light. So in my opinion, this 220B would not be my light of choice to use within close proximity of a microphone. However, this SmallRig light is a budget option, so take it as you may. Now, as you'll see, this unit does come with an XLR power input, and I really like this because this is just a much more secure connection. It's solid. However, the security of this is completely negated by what they have attached to this. This is ridiculous. This is the huge power brick adapter that is directly connected to this. And this, by the way, weighs 1 pound and 13 ounces. I know because I weighed it, okay? And I think it's quite a huge oversight to have 1 pound and 13 ounces attached to this, and SmallRig did not even give us a little plastic hook or anything to hang this on the light stand. So any dummy is gonna plug this in and walk away, and this is going to drop all the way to however far it can drop, and you're gonna end up with a very destroyed little power port here. You know, something like that. Huge oversight in my opinion. I know this is a budget-friendly light, but you know, with something like that attached to the power port, it's not gonna have a very long lifespan, in my opinion. Okay, so before we get into the color rendering of this thing, let's look at some more of the build quality of this unit. So one thing you'll notice is the little array of LED chips. It is not covered by any sort of glass protection. They're kind of just bare to the world. There is some sort of silicone over it, which probably is fairly strong, but again, you know, it's always nice to have a little bit of extra protection. But again, you know, this unit is kind of more our budget option. So bear that in mind. You will want to be careful with this. However, SmallRig does include the little plastic protector. So you definitely are going to want to make sure you're using that. So I love that SmallRig has a metal light stand mount. I really enjoy that. I appreciate that. The downside is that the yoke is not metal, it's plastic. So, you know, and that's kind of the case with this light. It really is mainly plastic. So that is something else to be aware of. You know, this is not something you're going to be renting out. I also don't know how many people are going to be hyped to rent a SmallRig light, to be quite honest. So it's not really geared for that, is it? This is more geared for our little guys that, you know, just need a more, again, budget option for your corporate videos, your talking head, maybe the wedding video guys out there. This could be more of a light attuned for those folks. Now, SmallRig does have a little umbrella adapter here for people that are still using umbrellas. I always find that interesting, and that instantly says to me that maybe this light is also more geared towards photographers. Also, I do want to highlight again the awesome case that SmallRig gives with these lights. They're really nice. They have a nice shoulder strap. They secure the light pretty well, and also they give you this little collection of SmallRig stickers. Okay, so now let's check out the color rendering of the light with my Sekonic 800. Now, when the hyperreflector is attached and the light is set to its native 5600 Kelvin, it's very accurate, coming in at 5635 Kelvin, and the light is fairly clean. So if we take a peek at the CRI, it has a 97.6. However, the R12 sample is really low at only 78, but if we look at the skin tone samples, which are R9, R13, and R15, those are all really excellent. Now, when we look at the spectral distribution, it is showing a slight peak in green, and the TM30 is showing a slight oversaturation, but overall a pretty decent reading of 93. But now when we look at the white balance chart, we can see the slight shift towards green and amber. However, that very small shift is not enough to ruin the overall color rendering. So it is pretty clean and accurate when set to 5600 Kelvin with the hyperreflector on, even though the SSI is a tad low at only 74. However, that's still certainly acceptable, especially for a unit in this price point. But now, let's see if there's any change with the hyperreflector off. So now the color temp did drop a little bit, coming in at 5,485 Kelvin. And if we look at the spectral distribution, it did bring down that little green peak, and the white balance chart reveals the light is now leaning more on the blue side versus the amber side. But now let's put the hyperreflector back on and see how the 220B does on the other end of the CCT range when we set it to 3200 Kelvin. Now it is fairly accurate, coming in at 3166 Kelvin. However, the output has dropped quite a bit, going from 417 foot candles all the way down to 148 foot candles. And if you look at the spectral distribution, we now have a huge peak in red, and the TM30 reveals a slight more saturation, and the white balance chart shows the light leaning green and blue. But if we look at our CRI chart, we see that our skin tone samples are still very decent, and actually the R12 sample improved. However, the light is pushing magenta so strongly that the Sekonic is suggesting we add a 1/8 plus green to the light to make it more accurate to what a true 3200 Kelvin should be. And now let's drop the light even lower to 2700 Kelvin. It flips the other way and adds green and becomes desaturated, to the point where the Sekonic is suggesting we now add a 1/8 minus green to get to a true 2700 Kelvin. However, on the other end of the spectrum at 6500 Kelvin, the light becomes very accurate and doesn't have any issues dialing in the colder temperature. However, I do want to point out that our skin tone sample of R9 drops fairly low when at that 6500 Kelvin temperature. Now, just for fun, I also tested the light at 4500 Kelvin. And again, the Sekonic is suggesting I add a 1/8 plus green to get it more accurate to what 4500 should be. And lastly, here's the light at 5000 Kelvin, which is fairly clean and accurate readings. So what is the takeaway here? Well, in my opinion, when it comes to skin tones, I would really only be using this light in the 5000 to 5600 Kelvin range, which isn't that alarming considering the price of this unit and the fact that it is an LED. You can certainly still use that broad CCT range. I just don't know if you'd want to use any of those other color temperatures on a person's face. But for daylight temperatures, it's a very strong choice, especially when you combine it with this new SmallRig pop-out light dome. This is the RAD85. Now this bad boy retails for $149 US, and it is a 33-inch parabolic softbox with magic cloth and egg crate grid. Just bear in mind that when this dome is attached, it is going to eat up a lot of output. In fact, from a 3-meter distance, that output drops down to only 42 foot candles. And a lot of this is because of two reasons. One is if you want to avoid any hot spots, you're probably going to be using this inner silk. And the other reason is because SmallRig doesn't offer you two different diffusions to choose from like a lot of other competitors do. In my experience, most companies that have these domes, they provide you with a quarter grid and a heavier diffusion, much similar to a magic cloth. But in the case of SmallRig, you're only getting that heavier magic cloth-like diffusion. But a nice thing is they do include the awesome egg crate. So the heavier diffusion that the RAD85 comes with, it is, like I said, very similar to a magic cloth, and it is going to cut your light by at least 2.5 stops. And then you're going to lose another 3/4 stops because of the inner silk and the egg crate grid. So this is all something to bear in mind. However, I do really love and appreciate these pop-out domes just for their efficiency, their speed, how fast they are to set up and break down, and obviously they are a really nice way to control your light, especially if you don't have the means or the gear to bring in another C-stand with a frame. Sometimes you don't have space to add another frame, so if you have a dome like this, you only need one stand and you can still really control your light, especially if you're using that A-crate grid. But I do want to talk more about that 42-foot candles from a 3-meter distance with the dome attached, because that isn't a lot. You're not going to be exactly able to battle the sun with that. But I do want to point out, if you're shooting indoors and you're shooting at more typical camera settings of, 800 ISO, 24 frames per second at a 180-degree shutter angle, even when you're at an f4, which is a fairly deep stop for most people, you would only need 24-foot candles for proper exposure with those camera settings. So any more light coming in, meaning if you were ripping more wide open than an f4, you would need even less amount of foot candles. So, for most of my guys doing talking heads and corporate videos, 42-foot candles from a 3-meter distance, that's what you get with the light dome on. That's going to give you a lot of wiggle room if you're shooting at f4 or anything more wide open than that. So keep all that in mind. However, now this does tie in with a beam angle and all of that. We're not going to get into that today, but I would recommend getting the larger light dome, this RA-D85, just so you have a little bit wider of a beam angle. Okay, so that's going to do it for the review on this RC220B and the RA-D85 light dome. Overall, it's a pretty decent setup. I like this combo. I am super bummed that SmallRig does not include a V-mount adapter. I did not get a V-mount adapter with the kit. So in my experience, this light is not as versatile as it could be. However, keep in mind, if you do order it from B&H, you'll get a free V-mount adapter at the time of the taping of this video. I just probably wouldn't use this light without the V-mount adapter. It kind of kills the beauty of it being bicolor, having that much output, even with the light dome. Without the V-mount adapter, I don't think I would use this, quite honestly. That's just me, though. And I think a lot of you guys, people using this, I imagine wedding videographers, they need to be on V-mount. So I really think it was a big oversight on SmallRig's part, not including the V-mount adapter as just part of the package. This is 2022. I think all little lights like this should just come standard with V-mount adapters. I don't really understand why they're not including it. So because of that, I am going to knock a few points off in the imaginary DogTimes rating that I literally just came up with in my head. So because the V-mount adapter is not included, and this dome is an additional purchase of $149, and we do know that the light is kind of wonky at anything less than 5,000 Kelvin, as well as anything more than 6,000 Kelvin, or honestly more than 5,600 Kelvin. So this light is really only usable on skin tones from 5,000 to 5,600 Kelvin. Because of all that, what we know about it, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have to give this light a 5. That's just me being raw, DogTimesing it up, being completely honest with everybody. Okay, so, but all in all, if you just needed something with a crap ton of output, especially if you're just into the habit of building book lights or pumping through some 4x4s or 6x6s, put the hyper reflector on and away you go. I mean, that is a lot of output, especially considering if you compare this to an Aperture 300X, that is a huge difference in terms of output between those two specific bicolor units, and especially when you look at the price of those two units. So, now in terms of color accuracy with the 300X, I don't know, I cannot speak to that. So, you are, you're gambling at your own risk there, but I don't know. I haven't really, checked out the color rendering of the 300X. I just know the output of the units. Okay, so that's going to do it for today. I want to give a shout out to all of my DogTimes Patreon supporters. Special thanks to the members of the Patreon producers tier. That's Mike Skinner and Fred Parr. I also want to give a shout out to our Pro Tips member over here on the YouTube channel. That's Visit VR. And for now, that's going to do it, folks. That's a big fat wrap. All right. we're good. Cough up a lung, get ready to dance and sing. It's dog time. All right, here we go. What is up, folks? XLR power input. And I like these because it's a much stronger connection. The fuck?